very good friends. Towards the end of his life, Frank Netter would go back to Houston to see his old friend Michael DeBakey, but this time not as a collaborator, but as a patient. So remember that Frank Netter went to medical school because of his mother's fear that he would become a poor, starving artist, but it was actually quite the opposite. He almost starved as a surgeon and became an extremely wealthy person as an artist. He lived in some of the most high-end real estate neighborhoods in the US, including Manhattan apartments on Fifth Avenue along Central Park, as well as other locations in the Upper East Side. They bought a farm out in Long Island and then relocated to Palm Beach, Florida in 1954. He eventually retired into a residence at the Breakers Hotel, and those of you who have been there know this is a very fancy place in Palm Beach. Unfortunately, Frank and Mary went through a very acrimonious divorce in 1955. In late 1956, Netter married his former assistant, Vera Burroughs Stetson, and they traveled extensively together and were happily married for the rest of each other's lives. And through all of this, Frank continued to be extraordinarily productive in his contract with CIBA. He renewed that initial 10-year agreement multiple times, and then, as expected, it took a lot more than 10 years to comprehensively cover the entire anatomy and physiology of the human organism. To culminate his career, in 1986, the CIBA Corporation said, let's put together an atlas of human anatomy, putting together the best drawings of anatomy that Netter had done throughout his entire career. And it took them 3 years to pick the best artwork, and it was 514 plates. And this became a Bible for many medical students all throughout our education, something that I carried around with me throughout medical school. And they spared no expense. They went to Japan to get the best printing company with the best paper, Daiichi Seihan, to publish the first edition. And the reproductions and the pictures in it are just absolutely spectacular. And this is how I learned and how I still think about and imagine human anatomy. And this was a book that became extraordinarily popular. It was a bestseller, not just for medical people, but actually artists used this. Lay publications like the New York Times gave it rave reviews. And again, it's a definitive resource for learning anatomy, and it continues to be so now in app form. The medical students that I teach have it all on their iPads. In 1989, the same year that the Atlas of Human Anatomy was published, Frank Netter was diagnosed with an abdominal aortic aneurysm. He was 83 years of age, and he was already in declining health from some other chronic medical conditions. But he did what he knew, which was to call Michael DeBakey and say, can you help me, please? So in September 1990, Netter traveled to Houston to undergo open AAA repair with Dr. Michael DeBakey. But unfortunately, the operation did not go well. And Netter was in the hospital for a long time with a prolonged ICU stay on the ventilator. And then he was able to be transferred back to New York City in 1991. And he was actually transferred to the Mount Sinai Hospital, which was the hospital where he had his first faculty position 6 decades earlier. Over the next several months, he was able to spend some meaningful time with family members and had some periods of good recovery, but unfortunately he died after a bout of sepsis on September 17th, 1991. But his impact as a medical illustrator and educator has continued long after his passing. The CIBA Corporation became part of Novartis, and they still own the original Netter artwork, but a lot of the reproduction of images has now been passed on to the medical publishing giant Elsevier. Frank Netter's cousin, Edward, and his wife, Barbara, lived in Connecticut, and in 2013, they donated $100 million to the Quinnipiac University to create the Frank H. Netter School of Medicine. And the school prides itself on providing a humanistic approach to modern medicine and serving vulnerable communities and populations. And they just celebrated their 10th anniversary last fall. And the keynote speaker was Francine Netter, Frank's daughter and biographer. As I mentioned, I got the chance to go look at the Netter archives at the UNC Chapel Hill Wilson Library. And it's a beautiful rare books room, and the papers and the collected drawings are just really, like I said, it's a treasure trove. And you go through it and you see these wonderful sketches, and you can see how detailed he was, the notes here, how scientifically he thought about things. And it was really a testament to the amount of work and the amount of knowledge and skill that was required to create these beautiful images. Here's an example. I think that's CPR there. This is the femoral vessels here. And you can see each of these is marked with a big red check mark, which I think it was like approved for publication, but makes it really, kind of mars it. Doesn't look, you can't hang it up on the wall unless you want to look at that big red check mark. And while I was there at UNC, I was able to meet with Frank's daughter, Francine, and she could not have been more generous with her time. We spent a couple hours just talking, and she shared so many wonderful memories of her dad. And she showed me some of his private art collection, including this painting that he had made of the East River, this view from NYU, where he had spent his medical school and his internship, that beautiful view of the East River. And then this picture, this sketch of Barney Clark, the recipient of the artificial heart, his wife Una, going through boxes and boxes of letters from people wishing him good luck, good health. And this is really, really wonderful personal stuff from Francine's collection. I want to take this time to just really thank her for spending that time, but also being the source of information and inspiration for this talk. So in closing, I think there are many things that one can take away from looking at the life of Frank Netter. His artwork has educated generations of medical professionals, and through that, impacted the lives of millions of patients. And I think it's wonderful that he really had a limited experience. I mean, he went to medical school in the 20s and 30s and then practiced very briefly, but then was able to learn so much about the incredible biomedical advances that happened throughout the rest of the 20th century. And he took that learning and he applied it and put it down on paper, and that's something that's become his lasting legacy. And I think one can also learn from Netter's somewhat circuitous career path. His childhood dreams of becoming an artist were squashed by the crushing weight of parental expectation, also the financial realities of the Great Depression. And he thrived as a medical student, but his surgical practice stalled, so he was forced to fall back on his first love, art. He was able to pivot and learn and grow from all of these unanticipated setbacks and challenges, and he was able to meld his two seemingly disparate worlds into an unbelievably fruitful career. And if you look around and think about it, there are very few direct, linear life journeys for even the most successful of people. Yes, hard work, talent, and favorable circumstances are important, but so are serendipity and the willingness to embrace an unexpected and possibly risky opportunity. Frank Netter took a leap of faith when he left surgery, and the world gained an artist who made the human body's intricacies and mysteries comprehensible, memorable, and above all, beautiful. Thank you very much.
I wish you enjoy Wen's talk as much as his mom and myself. As I mentioned, Wen was invited to give a talk at Ether Dome at MGH. That's where Ether was administered the very first time, because surgical chairman of Harvard enjoyed his talk so much, so he invited. Thank you, Wen. Wen has been the professor in endocrine surgery at UCSF and Fishbone Chair Professor in ambulatory surgery at UCSF. Thank you again.